My name is Donna Quinn. I'm 34 years old. And this is the story of how my nephew vanished in the dead of night, my family turned on me without blinking, and how I uncovered a truth they buried for decades. It was exactly 2:06 a.m. when the knock came. Not the soft kind that nudges you awake, but the kind that sends your stomach plummeting before your eyes can even open. The kind you feel in your bones. I had just drifted off on my sofa with a pile of night shift reports still open beside me when the pounding startled me upright. 2 officers. Flashing badges. And a name that split the air in half. Do you know where Noah Quinn is? Noah. My 9-year-old nephew. I blinked, confused. Noah? What do you mean? He's missing, the younger cop said. Reported from your parents' home on Bellamy Drive. Went to bed around 9 p.m. Last seen by your brother, Brandon. My mouth went dry. Missing, as in? As in no one has seen or heard from him for nearly 5 hours. I nodded, slowly, trying to breathe. My first instinct was panic. To cry. To scream. But I didn't. Because the real slap came when I asked the officer, "What do you need from me?" And he said, "Your family mentioned you might know something." They named me. Just like that. Like I was the one who took him. Like I had anything to do with it. Not once did my mother call to check on me. Not once did Brandon ask if I'd seen Noah. Instead, they handed my name to the police like a warning label. "She's unstable," I imagined them saying. "She's always dramatic." But what no one knew, not the officers, not even my best friend Leah, was that I had just returned from that same house 48 hours earlier. And while searching through their cluttered living room for Noah's report cards, I had found something. Something tucked behind a row of dusty cookbooks and old Reader's Digests. A file folder. Blue, plastic, unlabeled. Inside, crayon sketches. Doodles. And one folded note addressed to me. Miss Donna. That's what it said. The handwriting was jagged and unsure. But I knew it instantly. My heart started beating so hard I thought it might crack open my chest. "I'm sorry if I made you sad, but I'm scared of Uncle Brandon. He said if I told anyone, I'd be locked up like you were. I don't know if it's real or a joke, but I dreamt you were crying. Please don't be mad at me, Noah." My hands trembled reading it, the words blurring behind the fog of memories I had tried for years to suppress. Because once upon a time, I was locked away. Not in a cell. But in a summer retreat center in Idaho, after I told the school counselor that Brandon used to twist my wrist when I refused to give him lunch money. My mother told everyone I was dramatic and unstable. She never visited me once during those 11 weeks. And now, here I was again. The outsider. The problem. The one blamed, while a boy I loved like my own son was missing. The officers asked me more questions. I gave them the folder, told them about the note. I even dug up the birthday card Noah had sent me the year before, his writing a perfect match. I recounted everything from memory, the late-night screams when Brandon used to rage, the stories I wasn't supposed to tell, the silence my family demanded like a ritual. They listened. Took notes. Nodded. And then, the calls started. My mother, first. Her voice sharp as shattered glass. "What the hell did you do? No hello. No how are you? Just pure fury. You had the police question Brandon. You're tearing this family apart." I held the phone with shaking hands. "I'm trying to save Noah," I said. But she wasn't listening. "You've always needed attention," she hissed. "Always pretending someone hurt you." Click. Then Brandon called. Casual. Cold. "You still don't know how to keep your mouth shut, do you?" he chuckled. "You think anyone's gonna believe you, Donna? You've got a history. You were in treatment. The cops aren't gonna side with the crazy girl. I didn't answer. Just pressed record. Let his voice capture itself like a snake in a bottle. But the worst blow didn't come from Brandon. Or my mother. It came the next morning when a clip surfaced in a local Facebook group. A 45-second phone video of me leaving my parents' house, folder clutched to my chest, my face pale and drained. The caption read: Local ER nurse has public breakdown during police investigation. Possibly unstable. By noon, my hospital placed me on administrative leave. I opened the HR email and read the words over and over again like a slap I couldn't dodge. We've seen the circulating clip and must verify your mental health status for safety reasons. Me. The woman who worked 3 years straight without a sick day. Me, who held a COVID patient's hand until his final breath. Me, who trained half the damn ER nurses in trauma protocol. Labeled unstable. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, unable to move. The room tilted. The walls pulsed. It wasn't the panic of losing a job. It was the panic of being erased again. Like when I was 10 and Brandon locked me in the storage room, yanked me by the hair, and cut it off in ugly jagged chunks just because I wouldn't give him a paracord bracelet I'd made. He opened the door afterward and laughed. Now nobody's gonna want to look at you. And my mother? She swept the hair from the kitchen floor and said, He's a boy, Donna. He didn't mean it. Why do you always make everything so serious? That night, I sat in the dark, head spinning. And then, like a blessing sent from a past that never turned its back, Leah texted me. Can I come over? There's something you need to hear. Don't ask. Just open the door. 10 minutes later, Leah stepped in from the rain and placed a silver USB drive on the table. I found this going through Noah's art cubby at school. She looked tired. Pale. Like she'd known a secret she hadn't dared name. He recorded himself. An audio diary. He called it a game. Said he wanted to remember the stuff that mattered. My hands trembled as I plugged the USB in. The first file played Noah's voice. Soft. Honest. Today Uncle Brandon got mad. He said I broke the TV remote. I didn't. But he said I was lying. Next file. He said if I told Aunt Donna, I'd get sent away like she did. Then the third. A sob. Muffled. Then a low growl. This time it's your fault, kid. If anyone finds out, I swear you'll regret it. Brandon's voice. There was no denying it. Not anymore. I sat still for a long time. Hours. Replaying the clips like a broken lullaby. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. And Noah wasn't lying. For the first time in 2 decades, I felt the weight shift. The truth was finally louder than the silence they forced on us. And I knew what I had to do next. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the glow of my laptop screen while Noah's voice repeated in my ears like a broken prayer. His little words. His careful tone. The fear buried in each syllable. That USB was more than evidence, it was a cry for help. By morning, I had emailed the audio files to the lead investigator and written a formal statement. I attached copies of Noah's letter and included my own annotated diary pages. I wrote the email like a nurse filling out a death report, precise, emotionless. But every keystroke felt like I was yanking my childhood out of a locked box. And then, the phone rang. Not the police. Not the hospital. It was Leah. Donna, she said, her voice taut, you might want to sit down. My heart dropped. What now? She hesitated. Your mother just gave a press conference. I stood frozen in the middle of my hallway. A what? Turn on Channel 9. Right now. I rushed to the living room and flicked on the TV. And there she was, Ella Quinn. My mother. Standing behind a podium in front of a crowd of reporters like she was accepting an award. Cream blazer. Perfect hair. Calm expression. Her voice was polished to perfection. Our family is facing false accusations from our eldest daughter, Donna Quinn. These claims are deeply hurtful and without merit. My mouth fell open. Brandon Quinn, my son, is a loving uncle and has always been protective of Noah. My daughter, however, has a history of emotional instability. She was sent for treatment in adolescence and unfortunately has carried unresolved feelings since then. I stood there shaking. She was painting me as unhinged. Again. We tried everything to help her. But Donna has always had a tendency to imagine and fabricate. I barely noticed that my tea had gone cold. Leah sat beside me, her fists clenched. She's turning you into the villain, Leah muttered. Again. And then, my father stepped up beside my mother. He looked as silent as ever, his lips pressed tight, but when asked by a reporter, he simply nodded and said, "Yes, Donna was treated for psychological stress as a teen." Like it was nothing. Like that was the explanation. "They're burying you again," Leah whispered. Trying to discredit everything. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. But my pulse was racing. I had handed over solid evidence, Noah's letter, the voice recordings, even the audio of Brandon's threat. And still, they were coming after me. That afternoon, Leah made a decision that would change everything. She sat down at her desk, plugged in her mic, and opened her podcast software. "I'm not letting this go," she said. "This week's episode is Noah's voice. Not mine. Not yours. Just his." I watched as she uploaded the episode to her podcast, Quiet No More. It was 13 minutes long. No introduction. No commentary. Just Noah's small, shaky voice. "Uncle Brandon said I'm not allowed to tell. If I do, he'll kick me out. He said Aunt Donna made up stories and that's why she got locked up. But I'm not making it up." Then came the audio clip. Brandon's voice, low and smug. "Who's going to believe you? Your mouth runs just like Donna's did." The podcast hit a nerve. Within hours, it exploded across social media. The hashtags lit up. Hashtag Justice for Noah. Hashtag Believe Donna. Hashtag Silence is not protection. The messages started pouring in. Survivors. Nurses. Teachers. People from small towns who had been silenced by families too invested in appearances. But nothing prepared me for what came next. An anonymous email. The subject line read, "You need to see this." No name. No introduction. Just a link to a password-protected drive. The message read, "I don't know if I have the courage to come forward. But I can't hold on to this anymore. The password is your nephew's name." I clicked the link. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I typed, "Noah." A grainy video loaded. Black and white. Timestamp, 2:07 a.m., the night Noah vanished. My breath caught. A security cam from the house across the street. It showed the back door of my parents' house creak open. A tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, wearing a black jacket. In his hand, he held a child's wrist. Noah. No coat. No backpack. Just pajamas and bare feet. They walked across the yard in silence. The man opened the door of a parked SUV. Noah climbed inside. Then the car drove away. No struggle. No shouting. It looked like a planned trip. I watched it 10 times. Then saved the video in 3 separate folders and emailed it to the investigator immediately. Leah sat beside me, her mouth slightly open. "He walked him out like it was nothing," she whispered. "Like he's done it before." And that's when the truth fully set in. It wasn't just about Brandon. It was about everyone who let him near Noah. My parents. The ones who knew. The ones who chose not to see. Because if Brandon was guilty, that meant they were guilty of letting history repeat itself. Of letting another child grow up in a house of locked doors and threats whispered behind bathroom walls. I didn't sleep again that night. But I didn't cry either. I was done crying. I was building a case. By the next morning, I had a call from the courthouse. The judge had reviewed the audio evidence, the letter, and now, the video. An emergency hearing was scheduled in 48 hours. Brandon had no idea what was coming. But this time, I wouldn't be the one cowering in the corner. This time, I was stepping into the light. I arrived at the courthouse early, the autumn air crisp as I inhaled a steadying breath outside the tall stone pillars. I clutched my leather satchel close, inside it the files that would rewrite my life, Noah's letter, the audio recordings, the grainy doorbell footage, and the yellowed pages of my childhood diary, pages Brandon thought he'd hidden forever. Inside, the corridors buzzed with whispered speculation. Reporters clustered near the entrance, their cameras angled toward the heavy wooden doors. Uniformed bailiffs stood at attention. I pressed a hand to my chest and stepped forward, each footfall echoing like a countdown. When the courtroom doors opened, I paused at the threshold. There, at the far end, sat Brandon in a charcoal gray suit, his expression calm and unreadable. My parents flanked him in the front row, my mother with a haughty tilt to her chin, my father staring down at the polished floorboards. The gallery behind them swelled as townspeople shuffled into the wood pews. Some offered sympathetic nods, others averted their gaze entirely. I found my seat at the petitioner's table beside my attorney, Ms. Jeanette Flores. She was already organizing exhibits, folders, flash drives, and printouts. Her gaze met mine, resolute and caring. I nodded. We were ready. Judge Whitaker entered, her silver hair neatly bound, her robes crisp. She called the courtroom to order with a single rap of her gavel. The hum of conversation halted. All eyes turned to the bench. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice firm yet even. We convene today to consider the emergency motion filed by Miss Donna Quinn regarding allegations against Mr. Brandon Quinn and the disappearance of his nephew, Noah Quinn. My heart thudded so loudly I wondered if she could hear it. I stood when she indicated. I unsnapped my satchel and removed my diary, the battered, creased notebook I'd begun when I was 13, the one that chronicled every bruise, every locked door, every whispered apology demanded of me. Miss Quinn, the judge said, gesturing to the diary, you may proceed with your statement. I opened to the first entry I intended to read, the corner still lovingly dog-eared, July 14th. My voice trembled at first, then steadied as I began. Mom told me to stop making things up. Brandon said I was seeking attention. Everyone stayed silent. Only I saw it clearly. He locked me in the storage room 3 times, cut my hair once, twisted my wrist 4 times. But the worst part was when he said, no one's ever going to believe you. And then, no one did. As I read, eyes in the courtroom shifted. Some widened in shock. Some reddened with recognition. I felt the weight of each word pressing against my ribs, but I forced myself to keep reading, letting the truth tumble out like stones over a cliff. When I finished, I placed the diary gently on the table. My attorney stood and addressed the judge. She presented Exhibit A, the crayon-scrawled letter from Noah, Exhibit B, audio recordings from his backpack, and Exhibit C, a still photograph from the doorbell camera. One by one, the bailiff displayed each piece on a large easel. My mother's face paled when she saw the child's handwriting addressed to Miss Donna begging for help. My father's lip trembled ever so slightly when the neighbor's footage showed Brandon leading Noah quietly into the waiting vehicle. Then came the most damning piece, Exhibit D, the afternoon podcast file that had echoed across the airwaves, played now in the hushed courtroom. Noah's small voice. I'm not making it up. Uncle Brandon said if I told Aunt Donna, I'd be locked up again. Followed by Brandon's velvety threat. Your mouth runs just like Donna's did. A gasp rippled through the gallery. For the first time, the defense table stirred. Brandon's eyes flickered. He cleared his throat but said nothing. Judge Whittaker leaned forward. Mr. Quinn, you may respond to these allegations. He rose slowly, facing me with a perfectly controlled calm. Your Honor, these are baseless claims. My sister, Miss Quinn, has a documented history of mental health treatment. I have always loved my nephew and would never harm him. He patted the polished surface of his briefcase, as if affirming his clean conscience. My mother mouthed, thank God, and my father nodded as though this were merely a family squabble. I looked at him for a long moment, at the same brother who had bragged to me as children about how he could hide evidence in plain sight, and spoke before my attorney could intervene. Brandon, I said, my voice clear, you said if I told, I'd be locked away. Tonight, you stand here denying it. But the evidence does not lie. Silence hung heavy. The gallery leaned in. The judge closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them, her gaze steady on Brandon. I find substantial cause to believe that the petitioner's allegations merit further criminal investigation, Judge Whittaker announced. I hereby grant the motion to open a full inquiry into the disappearance of Noah Quinn and allegations of domestic abuse against Mr. Brandon Quinn. This courtroom is adjourned. The gavel fell like a verdict. Cameras flashed. Reporters rushed forward with microphones. My cheeks burned, but I held my head high. I gathered my satchel, stepping past my stunned family without a backward glance. In the hallway, Leah embraced me fiercely. They can't spin this now, she whispered into my ear. You did it. Later, as I walked out into the dusk, the streetlights flickering on, I felt lighter. The years of shame, the nights I trembled in bed, the whispered family warnings, they were finally unmasked in broad daylight. I knew the road ahead would still be painful. A criminal probe, depositions, likely a trial. And my parents, well, I couldn't know yet if their denial would shatter or crumble. But for the first time, I held the power of truth in my hands. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I found a message from the HR department at the hospital, pending the outcome of investigations, your status remains on administrative leave. We will contact you when we have further guidance. I closed the email and breathed. Let them wait. Let them wonder. They had counted on my silence. They had underestimated me. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. In the distance, I could see the faint outline of the cabin where Noah had cowered, alone and terrified. Soon, he would be safe. And the next morning, I would return to the ER, not as the woman who broke down in public, but as Donna Quinn, the one who refused to stay silent. The cabin sat hidden behind a trail of gnarled branches and fading tire tracks, nearly an hour's drive from town, the kind of place forgotten on purpose. The search team had gone in at dawn, just hours after the hearing, armed with warrants and determination. I wasn't there when they found Noah, but the lead officer called me personally. Miss Quinn, he said softly, we found him. Alive. My knees buckled. I slid to the floor of my hallway, phone pressed to my ear, trembling. He was curled up in a corner, the officer continued, holding an old hoodie like it was a lifeline. There's no power in the cabin. No food that wasn't expired. Just a mattress on the floor. He's at County Hospital now for observation. My voice cracked as I whispered, Is he okay? He's dehydrated. Frightened. But not harmed physically beyond that. He asked if you were coming. I was already grabbing my keys before he finished the sentence. The hospital room was quiet when I entered. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender-scented hand soap. Noah sat on the edge of the bed in oversized gray hospital socks, clutching a pillow to his chest. His face looked older than 9, too alert, too careful. Like someone who no longer believed the world was safe. He didn't look at me right away. But after a minute, his small shoulder tilted slightly toward mine, and I took it as an invitation. I sat down on the chair beside his bed and folded my hands in my lap. He finally turned, his voice barely audible. Did I do something wrong? It shattered something in me. No, sweetheart, I said, my throat tightening. You were brave. So brave. His lower lip trembled. He said if I told anyone, I'd get sent away. Like you. I leaned closer and wrapped both my hands around his. He was wrong. I should have spoken sooner. I should have come back sooner. But I'm here now. And I believe you. And then he cried. Not loud sobs, not screaming tears. Just a slow, shaking grief that ran too deep for sound. I pulled him gently into my arms and let him bury his face into my shoulder. I held him the way I once wished someone had held me after that storage room door slammed shut. After the scissors snapped near my ears. After my mother swept my hair into a trash bag like it meant nothing. That night, when I left the hospital, I didn't go straight home. I went to the cabin. The officers were still cataloging evidence when I arrived. A young woman in uniform led me inside with a flashlight. I expected to feel fear, but all I felt was fury. The floorboards creaked under my feet. The walls were bare except for a nail where a photo might have once hung. The only furniture was a wooden crate and a broken chair. And in the corner, under a loose floorboard in the attic, they had found something they wanted me to see. It was a wooden chest. Inside, the red knit hat I made in high school, a broken plastic bracelet, and, worst of all, a bundle of yellowed papers bound with a cracked rubber band. My diary pages. The torn-out ones. The pages I thought were lost forever. I flipped through them, my hands shaking. Page after page, my 13-year-old handwriting staring back at me. April 8th. Mom said I should apologize to Brandon. I didn't do anything wrong. I just told the truth. June 2nd. He locked me in the garage again. No one said anything at dinner. I think I don't exist to them unless I smile. July 19th. He cut up the picture of Leah and me from camp. Said I don't need friends. Some pages had been blacked out. Others had angry lines scrawled over them in pen, liar, drama queen, you asked for it. I felt a hand on my shoulder. The female officer from earlier stood there with a clipboard. You okay? I nodded, though I wasn't. But I needed to be. Would you like to take these with you? She asked. We've made digital copies for the investigation. These originals belong to you. I didn't hesitate. Yes. I want them. She nodded and gently handed them over. As I stepped out of the cabin and into the cold dusk, I realized something. Brandon hadn't just kept those pages to hurt me. He kept them because he needed them. He needed proof that he could rewrite my truth, that he held control even over the past. But not anymore. By the following week, the headlines had shifted. The public wasn't asking if I was unstable anymore. They were asking why Brandon had access to Noah. Why no one stopped him. Why my parents fought so hard to defend him. Leah's podcast became a national talking point. Quiet No More now had sponsors. A segment aired on public radio. A trauma specialist reached out. Lawyers offered their services. My hospital reached out with a short email. Miss Quinn, your leave has ended. We'd like to welcome you back at your convenience. And so, on a cool Monday morning, I walked back through those glass doors. The nameplate on the ER supervisor's office still read Donna Quinn, RN. It hadn't been touched. A younger nurse, the same one who once avoided my eyes, greeted me with a small smile. Welcome back, she said. And it wasn't awkward or forced. It held something else. Respect. Not for what I had survived, but for the fact that I spoke up. That I didn't let them define me. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly and rearranges the whole room. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything online. I just brewed a pot of coffee in the break room, clocked in, and walked down the corridor with my stethoscope around my neck. Back where I belonged. Except now, I was more than just a nurse. I was a guardian. A witness. A fighter. And I still had one more battle ahead. The civil hearing. The one that would decide if Noah would stay with me, permanently. The civil hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday. I arrived half an hour early, wearing a navy blazer and the necklace Grandma Quinn had given me before she passed, a thin gold chain with a tiny heart charm. Noah was already in the care of a child psychologist, and the court had assigned him a guardian ad litem to ensure his voice was heard fairly. But I knew the stakes. This wasn't just about guardianship. It was about history. About whether the court would side with appearances or truth. I sat outside the courtroom, alone, rereading the pages of my affidavit. Behind those closed doors, my family was assembling again. But this time, not for dinner. Not for a Christmas photo. But for war. My lawyer, Jeanette Flores, arrived right on time, briefcase in hand, calm as ever. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a nod. You ready? I don't know, I said. But I'm here. We stepped inside together. The courtroom was smaller than the one from the criminal hearing. No gallery packed with reporters. No camera crews. Just wood-paneled walls, the quiet shuffle of papers, and the sharp scent of lemon polish. My parents sat at the opposite end, arms crossed tightly. My mother's lips were painted in a shade she only wore for funerals and board meetings. My father didn't look at me. Not once. Brandon wasn't present. He was still in holding, awaiting further investigation. But his shadow lingered in every word my parents were about to say. The judge, this time a family court magistrate named Howard Langston, called the hearing to order. The opposing attorney, a woman named Ms. Carlton hired on behalf of my parents, stood first. Your Honor, our clients, Richard and Elaine Quinn, seek guardianship of their grandson, Noah Quinn, due to what they perceive as instability in the home of Donna Quinn. While we acknowledge Miss Quinn's recent contributions to this investigation, her own mental health history and extended estrangement from the family are relevant factors in determining long-term custody. It was polite. Polished. Delivered like a news report. But what she didn't say was louder. What she didn't say was, this family turned their backs on their daughter for over a decade. What she didn't say was, they ignored Brandon's behavior, buried complaints, and defended him until a doorbell camera made denial impossible. Jeanette stood and cleared her throat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. Your Honor, the facts are as follows. Miss Donna Quinn has no criminal record, is employed full-time, and has been a consistent presence in Noah's life despite the barriers erected by her family. She has provided critical evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation that directly impacts this child's safety. She opened the folder and handed copies of the audio recordings to the bailiff. She has no documented instability in the past decade, and the treatment referenced by opposing counsel occurred when she was a minor, sent away without her consent after disclosing abuse. Jeanette paused, then added softly, she was punished for telling the truth. A silence fell over the room. The judge leaned back in his chair. I was called to testify. I took the stand, knees weak but posture steady. My voice didn't shake as I answered questions. I told them about the letter. The USB. The audio files. The night Noah was found. And then I told them something else. Something no one expected. I have a piece of evidence I haven't submitted yet. It's from the attic of the cabin. It's personal, but I believe the court should hear it. Jeanette retrieved the folder and opened it. I read from one of my old diary pages. I used to think if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would notice the silence and ask why. But they never did. They just filled it with louder voices and told me to smile. Then I looked up at Judge Langston. Noah isn't just my nephew. He's a boy who's already learned that silence is safer than the truth. I won't let him live like that. Not again. Not like I did. Ms. Carlton rose for cross-examination but didn't push hard. The wind had shifted. Even she could feel it. Then the judge asked something I didn't expect. Miss Quinn, if this court grants you full guardianship, what do you want most for Noah? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the words swelled in my throat like a song I'd never dared sing. I want him to feel safe, I said. Not just from danger, but from doubt. I want him to believe his voice matters. That he doesn't have to shout to be heard. That he doesn't have to disappear to be left alone. The judge nodded slowly. Scribbled something on his notepad. 2 psychologists gave their testimony. Both had spoken with Noah. Both agreed he had bonded most with me. That he had nightmares about being sent back. That he showed signs of trauma but also resilience, especially around me. Then came the final moment. The judge called for the guardian ad litem, Noah's court-appointed advocate. She was a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a warm voice. I met with Noah 4 times, she said. Each time, I asked where he wanted to live. He never changed his answer. She looked at the judge. Then at me. Noah said, I want to stay with Miss Donna. She listens even when I'm not talking. That was it. The courtroom fell into a hush so deep I could hear my heart beating like a war drum in my chest. Judge Langston gathered his notes, removed his glasses, and spoke. In light of the evidence, and in the best interest of the child, the court grants Miss Donna Quinn full legal guardianship of Noah Quinn, effective immediately. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I breathed without guilt sitting on my chest like a stone. My parents stood, ready to object. My mother hissed something under her breath. But the judge cut them off. This ruling is final, he said. And if there is any attempt to contact the minor outside approved channels, restraining orders will be considered. Jeanette reached over and squeezed my hand. It's done, she whispered. Outside the courthouse, the sky was beginning to shift into that soft gold color it only wears at dusk. I stepped into the light with Jeanette at my side and a crowd of reporters gathering, but I didn't stop. I wasn't there for spectacle. I was going home. To Noah. To the small house in Forest Glen with the squeaky floorboards and the east-facing window he loved. We were finally building something. Together. The small house in Forest Glen wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, chipped paint on the porch, and a backyard full of stubborn weeds. But to Noah and me, it was everything. It was quiet, safe, and ours. The day after the guardianship ruling, I let Noah pick out new bed sheets. He chose ones covered in tiny astronauts floating through space. He said he liked how they looked like they weren't afraid to leave. That first week, he didn't say much. He would sit by the living room window for hours, hugging his stuffed dog, eyes darting at every car that passed. He flinched at doorbells. Startled at raised voices on TV. But each night, he came a little closer. First sitting on the couch beside me. Then brushing against my arm. By the 5th night, he asked softly, "Can I sleep in your room?" I nodded. I didn't need to ask why. He brought his pillow, his nightlight, and the old crumpled paper he always kept near, the note I had written years ago, torn from my diary, now folded and worn like a treasure. It had just 3 lines. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are the truth, even when others pretend not to see it. He fell asleep holding it in one hand and my thumb in the other. I never told him how many nights I used to sleep curled around that same feeling of being too much for people to love. I didn't have to. He already knew. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the kitchen making grilled cheese when he wandered in carrying a wooden board and some papers. "Miss Donna," he said, peeking over the counter. "Can we build a bookshelf?" I blinked. "A bookshelf?" He nodded, serious. "For the things no one's allowed to hide anymore." I set the spatula down slowly. "What kind of things?" I asked. He looked at me with that wise, quiet stare of his and said, "The truth." We spent the entire weekend building it, Noah reading the instructions, me fumbling with the screwdriver. He was more patient than most adults I knew. When one shelf went crooked, he didn't cry. Just studied it and said, "Let's try again." I didn't tell him this was the first time anyone had ever built something with me. When we finished, he taped one item to the center of the shelf, a laminated version of the diary passage he loved. "They can call me crazy, a liar, weak. But if I still believe in what I saw, then I'm still whole somewhere inside." He stared at it for a while, then smiled, not wide, but real. That night, Leah came over for dinner. She brought her famous peach cobbler and a hand-painted wooden sign for our hallway. It read, "We don't ask why you stayed silent. We listen when you're ready." Noah traced the letters with his finger and asked if they could hang it above the bookshelf. We did, and something about the way he stood looking at it made my throat tighten. He wasn't just healing. He was reclaiming. Later that month, I returned to the hospital full-time. To my surprise, it felt like stepping into sunlight. The glances weren't sharp anymore, they were warm, respectful. Nurses who once avoided me now asked for my input during trauma drills. A patient even recognized me from the podcast episode and whispered, "Thank you for speaking." And at home, Noah was transforming. Slowly. Carefully. He started keeping a sketchbook. Not for school assignments, but for what he called the things I want to remember so I don't get scared I imagined them. He drew the bookshelf. The east-facing window. The picture of me holding his hand at the courthouse, both of us tiny stick figures with big smiles and stars above our heads. One evening, as I was grading paperwork at the dining table, Noah walked in holding a folded paper. "I want to write a story," he said. "A story?" He nodded. "About a boy who ran away and found a lighthouse." I smiled. "That sounds like a very good story." He stared at me for a long second. "But first, I want to draw the storm." That's when I knew he understood more than anyone had ever given him credit for. He didn't need to be protected from the truth. He just needed someone who wouldn't flinch when he showed it. And so I let him draw the storm. At night, we'd read books under a blanket. We'd drink hot chocolate from chipped mugs. We'd light candles when the power flickered. It was the kind of life I never thought I'd have, quiet, imperfect, real. And then one rainy afternoon, something unexpected happened. I got a letter. Not from the hospital or the court, but from Miss Darla Green, my old 6th grade art teacher. It was handwritten in neat cursive. "Dear Donna, I listened to the podcast. And I watched the hearing. I want you to know, I kept everything. Every note you wrote in class. Every drawing with those sad eyes and clenched fists. I thought I was protecting you by staying silent, but now I know I was just protecting myself from the discomfort of truth. I'm sorry. Truly. I've submitted a statement to the Family Services Review Board. You weren't lying. You were surviving. And someone should have stood beside you sooner. Thank you for making it safe for the next child to speak." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was release. So many of us carry the weight of other people's silence. We bend our spines into shapes that make others more comfortable. But eventually, the truth demands space. And now it had found its way in. That same week, Leah's podcast hit 1 million downloads. She cried when she told me. Then she laughed and said, "And to think, it all started with a USB drive and a kid who refused to stop talking." She wasn't wrong. We began planning something bigger, Voices Unheard, a foundation to help children and adults document their stories safely, especially those still trapped in families where the truth is dangerous. We rented a tiny space beneath my apartment. Leah painted the walls with donated supplies. I bought a second-hand coffee machine. We hung photos of survivors, quotes from journals, and a chalkboard where people could write one word that made them feel brave. Noah was the first to write. He picked green chalk. In big letters, he scrawled, "Louder." And right then, I realized, we weren't rebuilding the past. We were building a future. Together. It was raining the afternoon they filmed the interview. Not a storm, just a quiet drizzle that made everything outside shimmer in gray. Inside our new office at Voices Unheard, we had cleared a small corner room. A camera sat on a tripod. 2 chairs faced each other. A pot of chamomile tea steamed gently on a side table. Leah stood in the background, silent but steady, nodding at me like she always did when I felt unsure. The reporter was a woman named Rebecca Hart, from an independent media channel that spotlighted people with stories that had once been ignored. She looked to be in her 40s, brown-framed glasses, curls swept neatly behind her ears. But what struck me wasn't her appearance, it was the softness in her voice. "I'm not here to exploit your pain," she said gently. "I'm here to listen." That one sentence told me she was different. We began with basic questions, about Noah, the court, the podcast, and the family I no longer called mine. But then she set her notebook down and leaned in slightly. "Donna," she asked, "after all this time, why now? Why did you finally speak?" I looked out the window. The rain traced thin lines on the glass like ink bleeding from an old diary page. And then I said the thing I hadn't dared admit, even to myself. Because I thought only the loudest people got heard. That unless I screamed or broke something, no one would take me seriously. But I was wrong. Sometimes, the strongest truth is quiet. It sits with you. Refuses to move. And when you finally let it out, it doesn't need to shout, it simply stands there and doesn't back down. Rebecca didn't write anything. She didn't need to. The air between us held every word. Then she asked, "If someone out there is watching this right now, someone afraid to speak, what would you say to them?" I looked directly into the camera. Not as the girl who was once locked in a storage room. Not as the unstable daughter. Not as the nurse suspended for a breakdown she never had. But as Donna Quinn. The woman who chose the truth over comfort. I said, "If someone ever told you you were too dramatic, too emotional, too much to be believed, this story is for you. I see you. I believe you. And you never had to scream to matter." Silence followed. The camera clicked off, but the feeling lingered, like something sacred had passed between us. Rebecca reached across the table, gently placed her hand over mine, and said, "Thank you. Not just for surviving. But for refusing to stay quiet." When she left, Noah was in the next room, building a Lego model of a lighthouse. I watched him for a while. The way he focused. The way he hummed under his breath. He didn't know the full story yet, not all the dark pieces, but he knew enough. He knew that once, someone didn't listen to Aunt Donna. And that now, people did. Later that evening, I found him asleep on the couch, the finished lighthouse sitting on the shelf beside his drawings. Taped to the side of it was a small sticky note. "So nobody ever gets lost again." That's when the tears came. The kind that don't sting or burn, but heal. I sat beside him, brushing a hand gently through his hair, remembering the girl I once was, who held her breath waiting for someone to believe her. That girl was finally free. And in her place stood a woman who had walked through the fire, carrying a child who would never be asked to burn for anyone's silence. The civil lawsuit from my parents came months later. They tried to sue for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of reputation. But it didn't last. Leah's podcast had amassed over 2 million listeners. The story had been verified. Statements were recorded. Experts testified. Miss Darla Green stood in court and said, "I didn't speak then. But I'm speaking now." The judge threw the case out before it ever made it to trial. The restraining order I filed against my parents was made permanent. Brandon pled guilty to unlawful detainment and child endangerment. He received a reduced sentence in exchange for a full confession, but it didn't matter. He lost the only thing he had left, control. And I gained something far greater than revenge. I gained peace. A few weeks ago, we opened the official Voices Unheard Community Center. We expected 20 people. Over 200 came. Survivors, teachers, therapists, teenagers with shaking hands and strong eyes. We handed out journals. We didn't ask them to share. We just said, "Start wherever you want." And they did. Noah read a short story that day. It was called The Boy Who Found the Key. He didn't say it was about himself. He didn't have to. He stood at the front of the room, his voice a little nervous, a little unsure, but he read every word. The boy thought the key was to a door. But it was to his voice. And when he used it, the whole house changed. That night, we went home, lit a candle, and sat by the bookshelf we built together. He added another photo to the top shelf, him, holding the certificate of his first art competition win. I looked at him and said, "You're building something beautiful, Noah." He looked back, smiling. "So are you." And he was right. Because every time we choose truth over silence, healing over shame, we build something the world can't tear down. Not anymore. Sometimes, the most powerful stories don't come from the loudest voices, but from the quiet ones who never gave up. If you've ever been dismissed, disbelieved, or silenced, let this story be proof: you don't have to scream to be heard. You only have to believe yourself. Thank you for watching Revenge Echoes. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you or someone you know needs support, stay with us. You are not alone.